Okay, in today's video, we are going to be testing 17 of the most highly requested Fortnite Chapter 5 myths, including what happens when a train hits a supply drop, what happens when a supply drop lands on top of the moving train, and so many more Fortnite Chapter 5 myths. Real quick, make sure to leave a like on today's video, as well as subscribe if you are new to the channel. But without further ado, let's get right on in to today's episode. Kicking things off, the first myth is what happens when there are builds or even a vehicle over top of the exit of a sewer drain. You may notice in the majority of the Fortnite Chapter 5 map, the POIs will have these sewer drains that'll take you to and from the outskirts of the POIs. With this tunnel shooting you outside the exit of the sewer drain, what happens when something is blocking it, just like the brand new G-Wagon vehicle? Placing the G-Wagon on top of the sewer drain, I then went to the exit and jumped straight out, where I was surprised to see that the G-Wagon actually blew up immediately. Absolutely full health, and it actually did some good damage to my player too. So be careful blocking the exit of these sewers. Going into the next myth is, do attachments on weapons transfer from game to game? If you manage to make it into the vaults around the map, you may notice a workbench where you could actually change and add more attachments to your guns in the game. Testing this out, I had a common frenzy auto shotgun that I absolutely loaded up with all of the attachments you possibly can, and this thing turned into a beast. Though the name change, the first shotgun I picked up was an ambush frenzy auto shotgun. After a few more games, I found the same ambush frenzy auto shotgun, and the attachments unfortunately did not transfer from game to game. Going into the next myth is, how long does it take for the train to do one complete rotation around the map? Testing this myth out, I jumped on the train at the far north side of the map, and I rode the train in a complete circle all the way around the map and timed exactly how long it took. It took approximately 9 minutes to do one full circle around the map, which is really good to know. If the train is about halfway across the map from you, it'll be about 4.5 minutes, so keep that in mind. Going into the next myth is, will the forecast tower keycard work at any other forecast tower? This is great to keep in mind in case you do fight the AIs and get the forecast tower keycard but can't make your way back to the same tower. After fully eliminating the guards, I then made my way to the farthest forecast tower that it possibly can have on the map, even though the directions were telling me to go to the closest one. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this in game, but it's always good to know in case the tower next to you is being camped. But surprisingly, the keycard worked at a completely different tower, and it did still show us the location of the upcoming storm. Going into the next myth is, can you save yourself from fall damage by mantling onto the side of a wall? There's brand new Fortnite physics in Chapter 5 where you can mantle up the side of the wall, getting to the top of a build without using a single build whatsoever. Shockingly, you could also use the same technique from the top down by jumping off the top of the build and mantling onto the side of the wall. Your player will take 0 fall damage and make their way back up to the top of the build. Keep in mind though, if you are high enough and miss the mantle, it might hurt a little. Going into the next myth is, can Mystique still shapeshift into the new bosses or even the guards? The Mystique skin is an OG, and I feel like so many people forget about Mystique, but surprisingly, Mystique is still able to shapeshift into any of the guards after you do eliminate them, which make for a pretty cool experience playing Fortnite as one of the guard skins. I'm unsure if this one's in the battle pass, it may be, but you could also do this to the bosses, which skins are available in the battle pass. But you know, this is a good way to test out the skins without actually purchasing the battle pass, and you know, you get to play with it for a limited amount of time, of course, until your player does get shot. You might be able to trick some players as well. Going into the next myth, and a very interesting myth, what happens when a train hits a supply drop? Now keep in mind how hard it is to get a supply drop to even land near or on top of the train tracks around the map. In this specific case, I got a supply drop to land right on the edge of the train tracks, but it was close enough where the train will actually clip it, you know, just a little bit on the side, as well as the balloon. Now the storm was coming in and I had no health, the train was nowhere near, so I waited for the train to get closer, where I then made my way as close as I possibly can, and I got eliminated right before it was about to hit the supply drop, so I didn't get to actually see it in game. Fortnite, they really did me dirty with this one. Going back into replay mode though, I was surprised to see that the train actually went straight through the supply drop, doing no damage to the balloon nor the crate, not breaking the balloon, which I thought would have happened, but the supply drop was there afterwards fine. Going into the next myth is, will the grapple blade's radius deal damage to 2 walls at the same time? The new grapple blade is no joke, and it does a pretty good amount of damage to walls, especially when players are not expecting it. With its swing radius though, if you are close to a wall, it'll only damage 1 wall at a time, but if you are in between 2 builds and you do the grapple blade swing, it'll actually damage both builds at the same time, making this actually a pretty interesting small little feature that we never thought about. Jumping straight into the next myth is, will a Flowberry's anti-gravity effect affect your player when jumping on a launch pad? Now, the new Flowberries around the map, when you consume them, it'll give you a couple of seconds of the anti-gravity effect that we remember from the older Fortnite season. Combining this with, you know, a launch pad or any other type of device that launches your player into the air can be very efficient. Jumping off the launch pad at this peak just normally will launch your player a pretty good height into the air. But if you consume a Flowberry before you jump on the launch pad and then jump on it, it's a whole different level. You are way higher up into the air, and this makes it much more efficient. Very similar to the last myth, this myth is, what happens when you combine a Flowberry with a shockwave grenade? Honestly, testing this myth out, you could probably predict exactly what is going to happen. A normal shockwave will launch your player a pretty good height up into the air, but if you eat a Flowberry right before you do so, just like jumping onto the launch pad, it'll actually launch your player significantly higher, making this much more efficient. With how common the shockwave grenades are this season, as well as the Flowberries, I definitely think this is a great combo to hold in your inventory, especially for a rotation around the map. Also, I believe the storm is a little bit faster too, so this will help you out in that case as well. Going into the next myth, and honestly a highly requested myth, this myth is, what happens when you jump in front of the moving train? Going into this myth, I was completely expecting the train to eliminate your player immediately, but that is just not the case. When you are in front of the train and it hits you, it'll actually bounce your player up on top of the train, and you could also do kind of like a weird little bounce back and forth when you jump from the top of the train to the front of the train, which you might want to do if you are riding the train, making your player much more harder to hit. But what's good to know is that you take 0 damage. Going into the next myth is, what happens when you throw a shield breaker grenade directly at a vending machine? These new shield breaker EMP grenades are honestly a little bit overpowered, and if you do throw them directly at the vending machine, it is a really great way to get some gold. For a slight second, it'll make the vending machine completely out of service, but it'll drop a good amount of gold on the ground. Now, if you do throw multiple at once, I would suggest waiting a couple seconds in between to maximize the amount of gold you get out of the vending machine. But just a couple of seconds ago, I didn't have enough to buy a 50 pot, and now I could buy out the entire thing. Honestly, a great little secret just to keep in mind. Going into the next myth is, will the Flowberry anti-gravity effect make your player mantle up a wall quicker than normal? This is actually very interesting because the anti-gravity effect makes your player jump higher than normal. So with the new mantling feature, did Fortnite take that into consideration? After building up a giant wall, I then ate a Flowberry, giving me the anti-gravity effect, and I mantled up the wall where it seemed to be just really the same speed, even though I did have that anti-gravity effect. Comparing this to a normal mantle climb up the side of the wall, it is a little bit buggy regardless, but it's really the same speed. Nothing significant. Going into the next myth is, will you take fall damage after using the grapple blade? We're all so used to the grappler from the OG Fortnite days. With the brand new grapple blade, will you take fall damage from that? After building a giant ramp, I then grappled up to the floor at the top where my player did hit the floor, dropped immediately down to the ground, taking no damage. I then tried this one more time without hitting the floor, and I was surprised to see I still took no damage. Switching it up a little bit, I then went to the top of the ramp and grappled down, taking still no damage, which is great to keep in mind. Now though, if you do grapple onto the same height as you on the floor, you will take fall damage and you will be eliminated. So just be a little bit careful not to grapple at the same floor level as you, or else you might die. Going into the next myth is, will the natural campfires around the map still heal the vehicles in the game? These natural campfires are hard to find around the map, but it is great to keep in mind that even if you do have a G-Wagon or any of the brand new vehicles and you do light the campfire on fire, it will actually regenerate the health on your vehicle, but it'll be very, very slow. Also, is it just me, or did they change the texture on these fires too? Going into the next myth is, what happens when a supply drop lands on top of a moving train in the new Fortnite Chapter 5 season? This myth is extremely rare and extremely difficult to pull off. Not only do you have to get a supply drop to land on the middle of the train tracks, you have to get the train to be going by that same spot at the exact same time. After hours of searching, I finally had a supply drop land in the middle of the train tracks, and with the train coming very quickly, I had to do a lot of damage to the balloon just in case I need to drop the crate. The train was moving fast, the supply drop was falling very slow, so I made the split decision to destroy the balloon in order for the crate to land on top of the moving train. Even though the train is not completely solid, there's a couple of holes in the crates, the supply drop did not even fall further into it. In fact, after the train was completely completely gone, the supply drop actually stayed just floating up into the air, which is extremely unusual because if you destroy a floor underneath the supply drop, it'll fall immediately straight down into the ground. I tried to see if this was just a glitch. I stood on top of the supply drop. It allowed me to try and open it. Even if I try and shoot the supply drop or even pickaxe the supply drop, it's as if it's just stuck floating in midair. With a high chance of this never happening again, it's safe to say that the train bugged out the game.